Here we have from NPR, the Supreme Court guts affirmative action, which unironically, I actually, or ironically, I should say, I actually named this episode that before pulling this article up as support here, but it fits. The Supreme Court guts affirmative action, effectively ending race conscious admissions. So I'll just read the beginning here. In a historic decision, the U.S. Supreme Court on Thursday effectively ended race-conscious admission programs at colleges and universities across the country. In a decision divided along ideological lines, the six-justice conservative supermajority invalidated admissions programs at Harvard and the University of North Carolina. So, 6-3. You're going to hear that a lot moving forward until one of these Supreme Court justices dies or one of them retires. 6-3 is going to be the line. Now, let me point out before we dive into the specifics of this decision, it will be 6-3 as the best case scenario if we do not re-elect Joe Biden in 2024. The worst case scenario is that it becomes 7-2. Or one of the older ultra-conservatives are replaced with a younger, even more ultra-conservative. This is why it is vital that we win the 2024 election. I will loop back to this and we will rewind and we will go back to 2016 after we discuss these two cases. But for now, I want to say, if you need a reason to vote Democratic in 2024, Supreme Court could be it. Okay? Now, this is the majority opinion here. I'll read it for you. Many universities have, for too long, concluded wrongly that the touchstone of an individual's identity is not challenges bested, skills built, or lessons learned, but the color of their skin. Our constitutional history does not tolerate that choice. Of course, the dissent coming from Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson was absolutely shredding the majority's opinion. But a dissent does not mean anything if you keep losing. A dissent is a nice little poem, is a nice little piece, and I'm glad to have Ketanji Brown Jackson on the Supreme Court. Very happy, in fact. But a dissent, the same way that RBG's dissents were dissents, they're just essays at that point, basically. Because you're losing. You lost. We lost. The admissions for these universities took into account race. We all know this. We all know it. We've all argued about it, I'm sure. The scapegoat is not reality. The absolute random example that your crazy uncle brings out at Christmas is not actually how affirmative action happened. Because I have to say happened because it's not allowed to happen anymore. Race-conscious admissions takes into consideration race because the history of this country includes the 150, 175, whatever, 200 plus year. No, it's if we go to 1619 through 1865, you have over 200 years of slavery in this country. And then from 1865 to 1964, you have 99 years of functional segregation. Now, I will point out that during the Reconstruction era, some things were actually better than they were in the 1920s, per se. But that's not here. That's neither here nor there. That's a conversation for another time. You have 99 years of racial segregation after slavery ends. And that's assuming that you believe, which some people believe, that racism ended in 1964, 1965. After 1964 and 1965, you still have enormous generational wealth gaps, which you still have today, by the way. You have enormous gaps in educational opportunities for kids. For adults, you have lack of job training. You have lack of job experience to get higher paying jobs, which is again perpetuating in a system of wealth inequality. In a system of wealth inequality, you have less funded schools. When you have crappy schools, it just keeps perpetuating. Okay? Now, when you have programs like affirmative action that take into consideration this history of oppression, this history of wealth inequality, you see a attempt. It's not successful, by the way. It's successful in some ways, but it is not completely successful. You see an attempt to right the wrongs and level the playing ground for people of all races. Now, this case is specifically talking about, it actually discriminates against Asian people. Well, if you actually look at the statistics around affirmative action, one of the largest groups, if not the largest group, that benefited from affirmative action was actually white women. Now, that's not the argument of this case, and I don't even think that that's wrong. Because women have also faced years, decades, centuries, millennia of oppression under a patriarchal system. Now, in America, it's not been millennia, but let's be honest. They have not been treated as the same, as, white men. Now, this decision completely throws this out. So, I'll use myself in this example because guess what? I got into Penn State. I got into UPenn as a grad student. And despite what your crazy radical uncle might have you believe, I am a white dude. Yes, it is possible to get into college, believe it or not. Despite what, the radical right-wingers want you to believe, as a white man. And in fact, you can't just pull any random black man or black woman and just say, yep, they're going into Harvard and that's the way it is, because that's not the way this works. Affirmative action takes into consideration grades, extracurricular activities, which, by the way, when you take into consideration wealth inequality, history of oppression, housing discrimination, educational disparities, not just wealth inequality, but the lack of an income in a household, it is more likely that a young, let's just say 16-year-old African-American has to work a full-time job or at least a part-time job to supplement a household's income based on the statistics of wealth in America, at least historically, and it is still accurate today, than someone that looks like me, who could be a part of the football team, who could be a part of the choir, who could be in whatever, National Honor Society. And that's not to say that these other kids, don't have any opportunity, but it is to say that if you compare apples to apples, you cannot say that it even is an apples to apples comparison. Because if you have to work full-time or part-time on top of going to school, you cannot have extracurriculars which increase your ability to go to college. If you're somebody that cannot play a sport, you might not be able to get the scholarship that you need to go to Penn State. If you can't join the choir, perform in the theater, perform in the band, get in the National Honor Society, be in the Key Club, if you can't do that because you are working, you are taking care of your mom, you're taking care of your grandpa, whatever it is, this is one way of leveling the playing field. It is not perfect. It is not perfect because I will tell you, it is not just black kids that are affected by these issues. When we look at an intersectional analysis of class in America, it is not just them. But this program is not just looking at, the intention was not just to look at, boom, here's your wealth gap. It is also layering in a history of this country treating black citizens as second-class citizens. And it was working to alleviate this disparity, because if you provide people with higher educational opportunities, they will have better jobs, they will have the ability to make more money, they will break the cycle of wealth inequality, which then they can provide better housing, better food, better education for their kids. Now, in the chat, we had a allusion to Cenk Uygur of TYT coming out in favor of the affirmative action decision. Now, I don't know if that's the case. I'll take your word for it. Here's the thing. If affirmative action was to work the way that it was designed, and it was working, it did not complete the objective, but it was working. At some point, affirmative action has to come to an end. Because it says, okay, now, to the best of our ability, the playing field is equal. We know it's not equal now. Let me be clear. We know it is not equal now. At some point, the program would bring it to a more level playing field. But this was an inevitability on some level. At some point, the program would end. Now, if I was the Secretary of Education, and I will never be, so right-wingers, don't worry. I will never be the Secretary of Education, but I would look at implementing a more class-based analysis, because it, one, will provide opportunities for minority groups to have much more opportunity for higher education. It just will. By the statistics of United States income or wealth array, however you want to say, the census, basically, it will benefit those groups that affirmative action was originally intended to help. Second, though, and it's a more strategic approach, is that if you take a class-based analysis, you will also increase the likelihood of someone that is white, that needs a leg up, or a hand up, not a leg up, a hand up, to get those educational opportunities as well and break their familial cycle. Because those people exist too. And third, rhetorically, you break the stereotype that right wingers, and this is not why you should make policies this way, but it is an added benefit. Let me be clear. This is not why, but it is an added benefit. You create a colorblind approach on providing more opportunity to people. Because, like I just said, you are giving the opportunity to the black kid, you're giving it to the white kid, you are giving it to the Asian kid, you are giving it to the Hispanic kid, you're just giving it to everybody. And that levels the playing field. Because affirmative action does not just say that any Joe Schmo can go to Harvard. That is not what happens. That is absolutely dead wrong. It is taking into consideration a plethora of things, and affirmative action layered in race. That is all that it did. Since that is not going to be allowed, I think the clear response is just to say a class-based analysis has to be put in place to say, okay, you come from, I don't know, the worst part, well, the worst part of Philadelphia. Let's just say you're from Harlem and you deserve an opportunity because you're a straight A student. And you know what? You work full time at McDonald's on top of going to school. And you know what? Maybe you were able to do one extracurricular. That person deserves a shot. I can't believe that that's a radical thing to say. I don't think that it is. I'm sure anybody that's watching this doesn't believe that. But there are people out there that believe that that kid is not the same as this other kid just because they needed another lens to be analyzed through, another scope. Because again, the fixation on being so heteronormative, so white centric on some of these things. Like, why not just try to better the situation that we find ourselves in? Try to lend not a hand out, but a hand up to people. It's not that hard.